Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. I'm Catherine Norris-Trent. Today I'll be talking to Peter Maurer, the head of the International Committee of the Red Cross, who is just back from Afghanistan, a trip in which he assessed the worsening humanitarian situation there and held talks with the Taliban, the new masters of Afghanistan. Peter Maurer, thank you for joining us on France 24.
Thanks for having me.
First of all, how would you qualify the humanitarian needs of Afghans right now? Is the country at crisis point or just heading in that direction?
Well, we are definitely for quite some time on a crisis point in Afghanistan. This is a war which lasted 40 years. It's one of those countries who belongs amongst the poorest of the world. The combination of both the economic impact of COVID, which has affected so many countries over the last couple of years, and also the brutality of the war, in particular in its last phase from 2016-17 onwards, has been really brought the country to a very difficult situation. As we estimate, half of the population today is dependent on humanitarian assistance. Hundreds of thousands of people have been displaced, uprooted, separated, families separated. So this is a very difficult situation. And given the new reality which you were reflecting upon, we also see that the basic social systems now are falling apart. The health system, the water sanitation systems, the food system. Of course, electricity is a problem. It combines into a very deep humanitarian crisis that we are witnessing today.
Specifically, how has the recent turmoil, of course, the collapse of the Western-backed governments and the very speedy arrival of the Taliban into power, how has that affected the humanitarian situation, the needs of the people?
It has, first and foremost, affected the people because there is an internationally non-recognized government in Afghanistan at the present moment. This didn't allow the World Bank and other financial institutions and governments to continue working. Banks are closed in Afghanistan at the present moment, and therefore we have a broadening economic crisis in the follow-up of the military and strategic advances of the Taliban, which has humanitarian impact. So on top of an already difficult situation, which I was alluding to before, we have an economic and financially difficult situations. Big programs and international programs in some of the critical sectors of the health, food, water, sanitation are now on hold. And that's, of course, what deepens the humanitarian crisis from one day to another. Supply chains are difficult to put back on track. So the recent developments had another worsening and deep impact, and that's the reason why it is so important that we can increase scale and speed humanitarian assistance, and that we find a pathway back to a stabilizing effect of humanitarian work, and finally also to kickstart the economy again, because humanitarians possibly can't carry all the needs which are now emerging in Afghanistan.
And in terms of the financing, is it correct that billions of dollars of international aid have effectively been suspended more or less overnight? I mean, how does that get started up again? What action does it need to take to get the financing flowing back into the aid sector, at least?
Well, on the one side, this is a decision of each and every government, whether it keeps up aid and whether it recognizes this government. But it is also an issue of the provisions of international institutions, which many of them cannot finance or can only finance to recognized governments. So we will have a continuing insecurity in Afghanistan, which can only be bridged by good, effective and impactful humanitarian work. And this is what I was focusing on during my visit. And of course, if I say good and impactful humanitarian work, it's also about inclusive conditions which allow neutral and impartial actors like the ICRC to work.
In terms of healthcare, basic healthcare, especially for women, I mean, how has the situation degenerated recently?
One of the big issues is, of course, that the supply chains have been disrupted, and many of the primary healthcare centers and hospitals in Afghanistan today lack medicine and medical tools and instruments. And this is, of course, a big issue at the present moment, creates gaps that we haven't seen to that extent over the last couple of years, and poses a lot of pressure on the few organizations like the Red Cross, which is still there and able to operate. We have doubled the clinics which we are supporting from 47 to 90 clinics and hospitals in which we are working. But let's not forget that there are hundreds of clinics out there which still wait each and every day for the medicine to come, for the medical instruments to arrive, and this is not happening at the present moment.
Now, when I was recently in Afghanistan, a little before yourself, I met many people who were still very afraid, too afraid, notably women, to go out onto the streets. I'm sure you've encountered this, people who are traumatized by war, very fearful about the situation. Are you facing problems with, staff turning up to work, patients in need of healthcare, but afraid at this stage to go out and get the services they need, and problems also staffing those services?
Well, there are different aspects to your question. First, in terms of policy, we got assurances, and we have seen that our female workers can go back to work and are at work. And this is true as well for the Afghan Red Crescent societies. But you are right that many are apprehensive about the situation, are afraid to go out, to walk to work, to go to work, because they are afraid of repressions. But those who go are able to go, and we hope that this situation will continue and that we can over time build the trust again that female workers and patients are not afraid to go to hospitals to be serviced or to service populations. So it's a very difficult psychological situation at the present moment. It's, as you rightly say, a challenge to recruit qualified staff. Let's not forget that many of those tens of thousands of people who left have been working in critical sectors, in basic social services sectors, and it's difficult at the present moment to find the necessary and qualified staff. So these are all issues which have caused difficulties over the last couple of days and weeks, and which will probably persist for quite some time. I estimate that it will not be easy for many of the organizations who have left to just come back and resume as if nothing were. It will need quite a lot of efforts in renegotiating licenses to operate and be able to again go back to work.
Now, during your recent trip to Afghanistan, you held talks with high-ranking Taliban leaders. Do you think you will be effectively able to work alongside them to deliver the aid that Afghanistan needs?
We will see how exactly the practice unfolds, but I'm pretty optimistic that given the fact that we have been working with the Taliban for more than 30 years, also in regions controlled by the Taliban over the last couple of years, that we have developed a level of practice which allows us to go back to reasonably neutral and impartial work in the humanitarian sector with a diverse team as we have it at the present moment. Will this be with or without problems? Probably with problems, because we know that nothing is guaranteed and things have to be negotiated, agreed upon by consensus. So I expect that this will be a complex operation over the next couple of weeks and months, certainly. But I'm optimistic that we are able to do it, of course.
So in your view the dialogue and working alongside the Taliban is the only way forward. I mean, it's not just the political leadership, though, in Kabul, most of them now, but it's also, as I'm sure you well know, that the low-ranking Taliban fighters or different groups throughout the country. I mean, how do you intend working with them? I mean, you have some experience of it already, and does that pass off well for you at the moment?
Well, there are different aspects. Again, in terms of security, the Taliban have demonstrated over the last years that they do have chains of command and control which allow to bring security to certain regions. In terms of professionalism in some of the basic services areas, this is more complex. But here again, it was interesting to see that many of the people who have worked for the previous governments at the present moment are still in place and are working from the same spots as they have in the past. So I expect that the dynamics that we have seen in the last couple of weeks will further develop, and it's simply too early to say how exactly these engagements will work, but I suppose that the Taliban today have an interest also to work very closely with those who are competent and professional and are able to deliver services to people, because they need to deliver also in front of the Afghan people.
I'm afraid we're out of time. We have to leave it there. Thank you so much indeed for being with us, Peter Maurer, the head of the International Committee of the Red Cross. That's the end of this France 24 interview, but do stay tuned. More news coming up.